Tokyo Revengers, conversation and review in a way. There's some very good points to talk about in the manga. The manga and the story in general has flaws. The writing's rushed in certain arcs, chapters, and it feels kind of unfinished, even though it does have an ending. Um, but there's still some great things to talk about. Um, what are your overall thoughts on the show?
I like Tokyo Revengers, but I think that um, there's a lot of parts where there could have been more done, and I'm not sure the author had his pacing or his ideas entirely correct. Especially towards the end of the series. Not sure he knew like the direction that he wanted to go, and that ended up like causing the ending to be rushed.
What do you think was the message of the show? I think there's a couple of things the show tries to do. There's a couple of things the show tries to do. One is, I think, one of the most important things it tries to do is to reestablish the definition of strength and courage, because essentially the show takes place in Japan. The era that is happening in the show, which is like biker gangs amongst teenagers, actually happened in Japan in, like, I would say probably I think it's the 70s to the 90s. It kind of died down towards 2000. It was still popular, but at its peak time, there was about 50, 60,000 teenagers who were right around in Japan and do hooligan stuff on motorcycles and be part of biker gangs. But there was all kind of, in real life, it was kind of all one very big group. Whereas in the manga, we see different kind of gangs. No, not kind of. Teenage gangs. They don't really involve themselves in any like organized crime in terms of trafficking, but they do beat each other up over the minions, right? And so there's a lot of fighting. So if you're into that, that's a reason to get into it. There's a lot of tribalism. I think to what I was gonna say, essentially the reason why I redefine strength and courage is because the main character is extremely weak, and he's in an environment that the strong and the courageous thrive. But so quickly to some of the good aspects of the show, I think the costume designs, the character designs, and the overall art is fantastic. It really enhances the story. It really makes you feel like the story, the world building excels because of that. It kind of almost feels like a real story in your head because of how well things are drawn and how well the outfits are curated, and it kind of does feel like different tribes and different families. Um, what do you want to say to how it tried to redefine courage? And if you want to talk about the main character Takemichi.
It's not just Takemichi specifically, but in terms of redefining what strength means. What I think you're trying to get at is like instead of strength just being out of like your physical ability, like your ability to um, you know, physically like impose your strength on someone or like intimidate someone. It's more like um, your character in high pressure situations, and that's something that Takemichi, I guess I am going to talk about Takemichi. Takemichi displays again and again and again. That's his perseverance, right? And that's what really drove people to read the manga and continue reading.
I don't think the perseverance is a strength though. I think the strength, like what they were, because usually when people think of strength, they think of like the the biggest guy or the guy who's undefeated in martial arts, or and I think of it that way. And I think what the show tried to do is that strength isn't being able to, like, strength isn't a strong person being able to beat up the weak. I think what they tried to they find strength, and courage goes hand to hand with this, is to them strength and or courage more specifically in this case is n- being weaker than something and knowing that you're not going to be able to stop it, or to um you know not you're not going to be able to stop it, but still doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's where you talked about strength and character, where it's like you know the odds are against you, and you know that you're likely to lose, but you have to stand up and you have to fight back because it's the right thing to do. You know, there's been several stories that have talked about this, and I always find it, like, when they write it well, that it's, beautifully said, that strength and being courageous isn't about fighting for the sake of winning. Like, sometimes you don't have to win, you just have to fight. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's literally just about defending and fighting for the things that you believe in. And I think the story does a really good job of that. And because the main character, he's extremely weak. He doesn't know how to fight. He's like, any 12, 13-year-old. He's a relatively scrawny kid, but he's extremely courageous, and he fights for the things he believes in. And when in the beginning of the story, when we get introduced to him and Mikey, who's like the gang leader for most of the story, Mikey grows a liking to him because he steps in for his friend who was getting beaten up, and he gets beaten up to a pulp, but he makes the point that he wasn't gonna allow his friend to just get beat up and for him to watch. He knew that if he stepped in, he was gonna be absolutely stomped on, but he had to do it anyways, and he did, knowing he would get stomped on, because it was the right thing to do. And that's what where I think the story really tries to redefine, the strength of what strength is, and because it's more difficult to do that than to be good at fighting and fight the guy back. It's more difficult to know you're gonna get your ass whooped and to get your ass whooped for somebody else because it's the right thing to do than to be good at fighting and fight back.
But I do think that goes hand in hand with the perseverance because, like you said, he knew that he was going to lose, but he kept going back.
I guess to me it's just heart. It's not really perseverance.
I know. Oh yeah, I know. But I was just making the point that he kept going back, knowing, like you said, knowing that it was just because it was the right thing to do. He kept going back to time leaping, just to try to save people, even if he knew like he was gonna have to get beat up time and time again, or somebody else could die this other time. He still felt like he had to try to figure it out.
I think that's a great point, because the ending of the story ends happily ever after, but spoiler warning, I erased that part. To me, the story ends when Mikey stabs Takemichi and Takemichi dies. To me, the story ends there. And the reason why I say that is because the story, until the very, very ending where it ends happily ever after, which most people agree was rushed, right? It has this beautiful theme of that, regardless, especially with time travel, is able to tell this very well, that regardless of what you do, there are some things you simply cannot change. Some things just come with life and the pain of it, and you just have to deal with it. So originally, right, the character Takemichi, he gets pushed into a train and he goes back in time, right? And then there's this character that he falls in love with that he knows that back in the future was dead, right? So he does everything in his power to stop her from dying, right, in the past. And as he leads from back and forth, he finds out that with everything he changes, if he saves one person, another person he knew died instead, right? And so there's like this natural consequence with the time leaping where someone's dying regardless, right? And to me, this ability to not be able to fix everything and have to deal with the pain and sorrow of life, having to be able to deal with loss, which is something that pushes the other main character in a way, well, secondary character, Mikey-kun, to the depths of darkness, is that he couldn't deal with the loss of his brother. And then he couldn't deal with the loss of Draken. He couldn't deal with the loss of Baji, right? He held all of this inside and it just ate him up. And he wouldn't express it because he had to be the strongest person. He was the leader of a bunch of teenagers. He led an army, so he couldn't be weak. He had to deal with that pain by himself. And that's the burden he wore on him. And Takemichi didn't want him to bear that burden. But Takemichi wasn't strong enough like he was to bear that burden, right? And the story it goes through that, and you see Takemichi try to help and not be able to. And there's even a flash forward where Mikey kills Takemichi and then kills himself because he couldn't bear all the pain he was holding, the suffering, right? He didn't even know how to express that, and he ended up killing his friend along the way. But in the actual ending of the story, the reason why I think the ending ends with Takemichi dying is because the way the story started was by Takemichi getting pushed into a train and dying. Right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the only way he could prevent anybody else from... Because every time he saved someone, somebody else died. The only way that he could get everyone to live was if he was the one that died. And that's how I think the story would have been beautifully wrapped. Yes, Draken had died. Yes, Baji had died. But he had... it's like the ending's perfect. To save Mikey, he had to be the one to go, and I think that was great until the very end.
Do you think that connects to the fact that Takemichi didn't even know them in the very beginning of the story?
Yeah.
But he had only heard them through like the news and stuff, but the biker gang.
Yeah.
So is that why you're saying like that? When he died later, it kind of like, what's it called, filled in the gaps that were left because of his time travel.
Sure.
But on that note, do we want to transition from themes into just things we overall find like to be good about the story, or do you want to go on to like criticisms or?
Do you want to talk about how to deal with loss? Because I think Mikey is the perfect example of how to not do it. But at the same time, there's aspects like, very quickly, like I think Mikey dealt with the loss of his brother very well. He kind of leaned on his friends to get over it. He commemorated his brother through the things like he rode. Mikey rode a moped the whole story because he used to ride a moped with his brother. And I think his brother was a fantastic character, and the more we learned about him was good. So, but Mikey was strong since he was very young. And I think Mikey's character is a very important aspect because Mikey was never, he was incredibly polarizing because he had moments like, I forget the character's name. Do you remember when he had an airplane that was given to him by his brother? Toy airplane? And his friend's sister broke it, but his friend got blamed?
Yeah.
And he beat his friend to a pulp over a little airplane just because his brother gave it to him? Like, things like that, to me, I didn't like Mikey much. I think he was a person filled up with anger, and he did not know how to express it well. And I think he was a horrible person at times. But then there are times where he sees a friend that has I wouldn't say abusive father, but has a very poor relationship with his father. His father's not a good person. And he sticks up for that friend without any hesitation, regardless of the consequences. Like, Mikey has this very incredible, I would say, way of thinking, or this like rationalizing of consequences, where if he thinks something is the right thing to do, he does not care about the consequences. He simply knows that there are some things he knows that if he doesn't do it, he can't live with himself. And it's just not even in his character to think that way. And when he steps in and first meets Takemichi is a good example. When he steps up for the friend that didn't get along with the dad, and there's countless cases in the story like that where he just he really is like that. But I think at the same time he was a horrible person in certain instances.
Like just the fact that he allowed certain people to get into the gang, like just going back to when Takemichi first met Mikey, and how his friend was getting bullied by some of the Tokyo Maji gang. Like I think that just goes to show like Manjiro's character sometimes, or Mikey, that he sometimes gives little care to stuff like things if it doesn't directly involve him or his friends.
Yeah.
And that's
He's
really,
yeah.
Like he'll just ignore things if
he was more charismatic than he was a good leader.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't really he was just like
he wasn't like a good person, but you couldn't help but like him. Even me, who read the story, saw all of his flaws, saw all of the different realities where he ended up killing people or let his anger lash out. You still finished the story rooting for him.
Yeah, he was just like a leader, like in title, not in terms of like actual role. You know what I mean?
But he was so charismatic.
Yeah.
And if he liked you, he would do anything for you.
But in terms of things I liked about the story, I think that the story had fantastic characters, and the characters were very well written.
Some of the best supporting characters in recent shonen.
Oh yeah.
I'm talking like Baji was a fantastic character. Draken was one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character. He had his friend that went into fashion that was incredibly cool.
Yeah,
there was the brothers that had dyed hair, like blue hair, and not the curly hair. There's a character with blue hair.
Talking about the Black Dragons?
Yes, the Black Dragons, the leaders, the fight with the younger brother between the older brother. That arc was one of the best arcs. When the younger brother steps up to his older brother and he was actually able to beat him because of Mikey.
And then I'm also looking towards Izana, who wasn't actually blood related with the Sano. Sano being like Mikey's family. So that he was the leader of the other war. Or was that the arc prior that Izana was?
I don't remember.
It was a different character, I think. that
But
started the war. Anyways.
Smiley and
Oh yeah,
his brother.
yeah.
Who else? Yeah, there was just overall just a great cast of characters.
But with that being said,
Biggest flaws. I think the biggest flaws are the ending to the most important arcs. The ending of the Kisaki Teta arc where he just has a crush on Hina. Is that her name? Ina?
sure.
Regardless, there's this girl that the main character Takemichi is his girlfriend,
Mhm.
and the main villain in the first part of the story is Kisaki Teta, and he does a crazy amount of planning and a bunch of things just to take down Takemichi, all just for the girl, bro.
Mhm.
And the girl didn't even know him,
Yeah.
and it was like, dude, it was so poor written. That was so poorly written. Sorry. And then the second ends the story with the happy ending, Takemichi and Mikey both traveling back in time and living happy after. That was bad too.
Mhm.
So I think the two conclusions to the arcs were very bad. But if you cut right before that, I mean, this show had, if you want to talk about plot twists, it had plot twists for days. It had fantastic, cliffhangers, great characters, impactful deaths. If you want to talk about it, Draken's death was so well written, and it hit you in the spot. It was extremely sad, and you truly cared about the character. But at the same time, sometimes the show was just so silly, and I think that's what's hard about it.
Mhm. Yeah, because in real life, especially, I don't think Takemichi would ever go that far in some of the fights he had to, especially in the war, right? And then, but in terms of characters, I want to go back to that because that's one of my biggest criticisms of the story. Is that despite having like very well written characters, I feel like their potential was often wasted, just because the premise was set like in a delinquent like gang city, like kind of I don't know where I'm going with this, but because because the story was set to be about like a delinquent gang, and in Tokyo, it was kind of like there's only so much they could do with the amount of characters they had. You know what I'm saying? And that's the thing about like comparing it to a One Piece that also has a huge cast of characters. But there's so many episodes to build those characters that it like makes up for
You don't
it.
think the
Makes more
characters
sense.
were built well?
No, I'm saying like there's
Wasted potential.
not enough done with them. Like a lot of them were just killed off very quickly, or we never even saw much from them again.
Like who?
Like just Black Dragons. I thought they could expand it on that. I thought there could have been
Well, some of
another
them
arc
came
about
back.
that.
Some of them joined Takemichi's final group to take down Mikey. So, some of them were killed, but you still had characters like, what was his name, Penpa, the chubbier guy from the very beginning.
Yeah.
He's been there.
But I think the transition straight into the war, I feel like there could have been more.
The Three Deities War?
Especially since they were talking
Okay,
about.
that part was bad.
Especially since in the future they had said that they actually became real criminals, not just delinquents. I thought there was gonna be more on that, and like that was gonna be like an actual,
That part was also very good when they would go back to the future and see like how bad people's lives turned out, because they were never able to deal with the things that happened. Like they were never able to rationalize it, never able to grow from it. The loss and the death they saw forever impacted them. I think showing how bad their life turned out later was incredibly well written, and it really put things into perspective about how serious the things they were doing were. But to what you were saying, I think the part that I agree with you is that right before the Three Deities War, Takemichi just goes back to a bunch of the people that he's been fighting against for ages. Says, "Would you like to join me?" And the people immediately go, "Yes," because of this. Like, to me, that part, like that arc, should have been expanded out. Like, he should have had to like some of those people. He should have had to have fought and gained their respect for them to join him. Like, these are people who were like leaders of their own groups. Some of them were Black Dragon captains. Like, they had fought Takemichi. Takemichi was a pagan on the boxing ring, bro. They respected him just because of how much he got up. But like, I don't understand how like everyone just joined and then next thing you know they're on their they're fighting Mikey again.
And that's also why I think there's like only so far can go being shown into, like I was talking about how they actually became criminals in the future. I feel like partially why they didn't expand on that is just because it really transitioned. I think it would have to be a bit more mature going into that. And at the end of the day, the only two instances I can remember that we actually saw Mikey like time travel to the future when
You mean
they were
Takemichi?
older and they were criminals was when
Takemichi, you mean?
Takemichi, yeah. Did I say something?
You said Mikey.
Mikey? Was when he saw Hina die in the car. I believe he was older then, right? And when him and Chifuyu got shot by Kisaki. Kisaki was crying at that moment. Those are the two moments I remember, but I thought there was gonna be more expansion on that.
There was another one too where his friend Akun,
yeah.
he commits suicide.
Yeah.
And he was in jail for stabbing someone. That one was impactful too.
But besides that, I think there's a lot of characters just introduced just for the sake of the war, just for this to be this grand event, which I think they could.
Yeah, there was a lot of characters that showed up. They're like, oh, this guy's tough.
They could have done.
And then he boxed like.
Could have done a lot more preparation for that war if that was gonna be the major,
Let's wrap
arc.
it up.
But I just want to give an example, like the Brazilian guy that Mikey fought. I'm not sure what he was there for. He was this guy, like, he was from the favela. He beat up like just about everybody. Mikey ended up fighting him. I think it was just slightly before the war, and Mikey like battered him, right? And it was just to show, like, I guess how strong Mikey is.
Dino.
And then the power of the dark impulses, but I found that very strange. You know what I'm saying? That's another thing too. The dark impulses, I did not understand this is something I've heard other people bring up when talking about Tokyo Revengers, is the actual origin of the time leaping. The actual origin of the time leaping was very strange. It's just Mikey's brother.
Not Hina's brother.
No. Mikey's brother, after Mikey, when he was still a kid, had been hospitalized and couldn't live a normal life anymore. Paralyzed, yeah, that's the word for it. He went and tried to find a hobo that was supposedly a time leaper.
He had heard of a myth of somebody with a time travel.
Exactly. And then he killed him to obtain the powers, and the hobo left him a curse, and then that's how the dark impulses started.
Everybody who had the...
It seemed very rushed, and then it's really took, I think, too much of a touch of fiction at that point. You know what I'm saying?
That part was literally just put in there so that the ending they could argue the ending made sense.
Exactly. And
but it doesn't. The ending should have just ended with Takemichi being killed by Mikey.
Yeah. But anything else?
Just final thoughts. What do you think about the story overall? What do you think? Like, what is something that somebody could still learn from it, even though it has its flaws? And and on a positive note.
I think what somebody could learn from it is just the value of, like, not only friendship but character in general, and how it can affect other people, how your character can affect other people. And I think that's what they were really trying to show with Takemichi as a protagonist. Going back to that moment where he got people to join him, was they were trying to show that him emanating this, like, character of, like, just being a good person, a persevering person, a strong person, a courageous person, attracted other people to him and to help him. So I think that's a big thing that you can get out of Tokyo Revengers.
I think there's a couple of things that you touched upon there that are very good. First of all, the show argues that a friend is somebody you're willing to die for. And that's a strong definition. That's not a definition we have in Western culture. No. People kind of see friends as disposable in the age we live and grow up in.
Or even someone that can propel their own...
Yeah, someone that can benefit you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how people see
it. Make you look better. In comparison, even. That's how it is.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. Sometimes they literally pick someone who...
They'll look better next to.
Yeah, they'll look better next to. Like, literally somebody that them standing next to you puts them down. But the show argues the complete opposite. It argues that friends are someone you're willing to die for. And the way it establishes that is because people in the story actually do die for their friends. And it also argues that you need severe obstacles to overcome to become that close of friends. These kids go through so much, and it's why they care so much about each other, because they've been through so much turmoil, and they've been back to back, and they've helped each other up, and that's why they're friends. That's why they can call each other friends, and they're really able to die for each other. So that's what I think. One thing it argues that anyone watching this completely get is calling someone a friend is a lot heavier of a word than we take it to be in Western culture, and I think that's extremely sad that people don't see friends that way, and that they come and go here. It's like here in Western culture, the way people see friends is you have friends in high school, you leave them. You have friends in college, you leave them, and then whoever's still around is your friend after that. Like, how many adults don't really have their friends that they had as children?
Like they're always meeting up with each other.
Yeah.
Know each other's relatives.
Whereas, like, where Dad came from, he can still call his friends from when he was 10.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna pick up the phone, and they're gonna have a conversation about, look at where life's brought us, right? So it's a very different definition of friend here. And I think this is gonna be way too much of a reach, but I think that speaks to how the country was founded and how, like, people came here just for the business side of it.
Mm-hmm.
The people that lived here and lived a life with the land and had a relationship with the land and the soil and with each other were pushed out of the country. So, everyone in America at the time during colonialism, they came here to make a profit, and I think that speaks to the culture that we have.
For individual benefit.
Yeah. And then to the second point you said, I think another benefit that someone can get out of this is not just the talk about friendship, is the redefining of courage and strength. I think a lot of people see strength as just being able to beat somebody else up. And I think that's the complete wrong definition and way to go about it. I think strength is being able to do the hard things, even though you're not gonna get the best result, but you have to do it. Things of that sort. And then also, I think how the show tackles people's inability to deal with loss and death and pain. I think it shows how difficult it is to deal with that, and that some people will never be able to. And it tells us even if you can't deal with it, it shows the bad ways to express the hate and the anger that you carry. And I think those are all positive things to take from the show. And anything final thing?
One last point I have is just that it also, I think it's good for people that don't really have, deep connection, and not even, maybe deep's not the best word, but like a real connection with somebody else. It really, what Tokyo Revenger shows you is that if you go through something with other people, if you struggle with other people and live with other people, in general, then water can really be as thick as blood, and it's really just a story about brotherhood. I think
one thing you touched upon there too is that one thing the show does well is that as Takemichi learns more about Mikey and what goes through on his head, Takemichi learns more about himself. And I think that's a very profound statement, that in order for people to learn more about themselves, they need to get better at knowing the people around them. It takes knowing your parents. If you want to go on a journey of self-discovery, if you really learn about the people around you and what makes them who they are, you'll be able to see what makes you more, and you'll be able to see the parts of them in you, and it'll let you learn more from people. And it really talked about that knowing your friends is knowing yourself. And a lot of people don't know their friends. They don't, we don't even call friends what friends really are. So I think that was another good point that you slightly touched upon.
Connections are made by the experience, and Takemichi, just look at how he started in the very beginning. He was lost, basically.
Yeah, he was sort of an incel. He didn't have a purpose for living. And when he got pushed into the tracks, he wasn't even upset.
And I think that was really one of the most profound things about the story, is that when he realized the real connection he had back in his younger life was with were they dating for only a little bit, right? Or did she just know he knew?
I think they just knew each other as kids.
No, but I think they were dating back when he was young. He remembered, the only time I ever had a girlfriend. Isn't that how it started?
Yeah, maybe.
So, and then when he realized just what actually had meaning to him in his life, that's really where the time leaping kicked in. And I think that's a profound thing, is that, like, find the things that you like and hold on to it, because or else it can really be too late.
One more quick thing. I think another point that you really brought up with him being an incel at the beginning, or like having given up on life, is that this is very interesting. His life was easy when he first started.
No,
there weren't any innate difficulties. He didn't go through any insane troubles. He didn't have to deal with extreme pain. And yet, before misery, before pain, before struggle, he was okay with dying. The more pain he experienced, the more relationships he gained and lost, the more trouble he went through, the more things he overcame, the more in love with life he was.
it made me remember is actually, I'm pretty sure one of the first things that was mentioned in the stories that Takemichi realized that he had never really pursued anything in his life. He had never really done anything, and that's really what was interesting about like his first meeting with Hina's brother and Hina, again.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's very true. And throughout the story, it's like the less he hesitates,
Mhm.
the less he thinks about certain things, and he knows the pain that's gonna come with it, but he knows that having a purpose, having no purpose hurts more than any punch could.
Mhm.
And throughout the story, he has that ingrained in him, and he's willing to take 100 punches and having a purpose and fighting for someone and doing something meaningful, because he knows that before when his life was absolutely meaningless and he didn't take any punches and there wasn't any pain, he was okay with dying. It's when he wasn't suicidal, but if a truck hit him while he was crossing the street, he would have been okay with it. That's the mental state he was at. And a lot of people today, they claim to be in that space where they're like, oh, I'm not gonna kill myself, but if I just walked across the street one day and a car hit me, oh well, it's fine by me.
Yeah.
And it's like he was like that, and then he went through meaningful things. He went through pain. He dealt with loss. He met people. He loved people. He hated people. He went through the turmoils of life and left loving life and cherishing it and being grateful for the little things, as people say. And he really learned that through a journey of struggle and pain. And I think that's a testament to what makes us human, what brings us back to reality. When people who go through difficult things and overcome it love life the most. And so it's why these extreme sports, you're more into climbing than I am, to solo climbing than I am. And these people, they set these ridiculous targets, and there's their fingers are they have calluses all over their fingers. Their nails are bleed when they climb. Their hands are so thick, and yet they cherish the sport so much because there's just this feeling of purpose and achievement and success and freedom and expression that they can't get from anything else. And it's why they love it. It's why they climb to the brink of death, and they would rather die climbing than watching their life pass by, going to work, coming home, going to work, coming home. They would rather die at 40 chasing their dreams. I think that's a testament to life. It's the moment we let our dreams die, we stop seeing the reason in living. And Takemichi fought for that, and he was more Takemichi's end of being stabbed by his best friend. He would have picked that ending over getting pushed into a train and having no purpose every day of every year. And I think ultimately that's the testament the story makes. Its very final conclusion.
And on that note, I think that's one of the things that Tokyo Revengers ended up losing, is that in the beginning, it kind of lost touch with what it wanted to do in the beginning. Like in the beginning, when he was looking at the news, his room was trash. He had stuff all over the floor. Like he said, he's like an incel, a lost person, right? I remember him looking at the news and looking at the criminals. What had happened with what he didn't know at the time was like Kisaki and Mikey and them, and thinking like, oh, like what horrible people, right? And that's something that Tokyo Revengers also tried to tell people in the beginning of the story, is that there's always a motive for what drives people. There's always a reason. I mean, people are not innately evil. There's a reason.
Yeah, I think everybody that was a bad person had an insane amount of trauma and hate that they didn't know how to deal with.
And then I think they started to lose that, especially with the Kisaki arc and all that.
Yeah, for sure. They do
actual like more like profound meaning than just the girl I'm gonna kill this
right,
person.
That was very poorly written. But even like in the Black Dragons, the leaders, they had an insane amount of trauma and they were bad people. But I think one good point there is that the difference between good people and bad people isn't the amount of pain they've undergone. A lot of the good characters had gone through just as much pain, if not more. It's that the good people learned how to deal with that and didn't want to cause any more harm to anybody else because they know how much it hurts, and they went through it and they got themselves through it. And then the bad people are the ones that couldn't deal with it, and they didn't have a way to express their anger and pain.
They were met with the pain at the crossroads, and they decided to go on the righteous path. That's really what it was at the end of the day. And then some people go through that pain and go through that hardship and will choose the easy route. That's really what was separating people. And that's what Takemichi realized, that he wasn't going either route. He's standing still. You know what I'm saying? And that's when he also realized that, you know, he wanted to be a good person.
Overall, worth reading? Not worth reading?
I think Tokyo Revengers is worth reading. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tokyo Revengers is worth reading more than it's worth watching. I think the anime it loses a lot of the value in the art style. But yeah, overall, worth reading. Good story. It's about 274 chapters.
Yeah, found them right.
I think something around there. Some of the chapters are quick reads. Some are like 18 pages, like a lot of shonen. It's not seinen chapters. So yeah, overall, worth reading.